We're now going to introduce our speaker. We're so privileged to have Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat. He is a professor of church history and doctrine at Brigham Young University. He received his PhD in American history from the University of Colorado. He worked as a historian and writer for the Church History Department from 2010 to 2014 with the Joseph Smith Papers Project and served as a volume editor and historian for several volumes. He currently serves as editor of the academic journal Latter-day Saint Historical Studies, published by the Ensign Peak Foundation, formerly known as the Mormon Historic Sites Foundation. And he serves on the executive council for the Brigham Young Center. He is the author of award-winning articles on Latter-day Saint history and is also the co-author of 2 books on early church history and the translation of the Book of Mormon, From Darkness Unto Light, Joseph Smith's translation and publication of the Book of Mormon, and Let's Talk About the Translation of the Book of Mormon. He is an editor and an historian of the recently published volume, Brigham Young Journals, Volume 1. He recently received a church calling to place his BYU teaching on hold for several years and work full-time on a special project for the church, annotating the forthcoming volumes of the legal papers of Joseph Smith. Gerrit and his best friend, Richard Leduc, host a weekly podcast entitled Standard of Truth. The podcast explores the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith. So let's all give a big warm welcome to Gerrit Dirkmaat.
Can you hear me all right? You could probably hear me if I took it off, I would guess, right? Got a loud voice. I know what you're all thinking. I just came here for the treats. Frankly, if you ever want to feel really surprised, you can look like me and have the wellness people call you and say, hey, we need you to present. And I was like, well, on failure? Like what exactly, what's your goal here? Are you going to just put me up on the stage and say, not this, not this? And then, but then as I was thinking about it, because I was like, well, you're not going to get a whole bunch of people in a theater, by telling them, you're going to love it. I mean, he's like a historian and stuff, and he'll be like super interesting, and he does documents and right. I mean, but then I was, reading and I saw that this study came out and it said, especially afternoon naps, somewhere underneath an hour, super healthy for you. And now I know what the wellness program's after. Now I get it. They're playing 3D chess here. I mean, I didn't always look this way. I once looked like this, That's the shortest that goatee ever was. You can thank BYU for the fact I don't have it right now. Well, I guess my wife as well. She was not super happy about it. So because I'm going to be presenting some of Joseph Smith's teachings, I apologize already that I'm going to be reading a lot of things, which will help you go to sleep so you can get that health benefit from the nap. Some of the things that we may not consider, we may not think a whole lot about, is that the doctrine of the resurrection is actually a doctrine in Christianity generally that is becoming less and less central to Christian belief. Now, you'd think it would be the most central thing in Christian belief. But for various reasons, that belief is becoming less and less. So this survey came out, almost a decade ago, where a quarter of people who identified as Christians, what's your religion? I'm a Christian. Do you believe Jesus was resurrected? No. I'm not exactly sure why you're a Christian if you don't believe Jesus was resurrected, but it is actually a growing thing. And there's reasons for that. Part of the reason is that resurrection itself doesn't make a lot of sense to some people. For much of the Protestant world, they believe that when you die, you immediately go to either heaven or to hell. Okay, so if the inevitable happens and a light drops on me right now, and you're like, oh, my prayers are answered, I'm immediately going to go to heaven or hell. There's no waiting place. There's no place I go. So I'm instantly, if it fire around me, obviously, because I'm a Mormon, then I'm in hell, right? Well, when you have that theology, the idea of bodily resurrection starts to become kind of weird. So I'm already in the presence of Jesus in heaven. If I had faith in Jesus, I'm already there with him. I'm throwing crowns at his feet. I'm experiencing the greatest happiness that's ever existed ever. And then I get taken down out of heaven so that I can be resurrected with my body, so that I can have it brought back up to heaven and resume throwing crowns at Jesus' feet. I was kind of already doing this, but okay. Maybe I can hold more crowns now. I'm not sure what the point is. Similarly, you can take the opposite thought with hell. So I go to hell, I'm burning in hell, writhing in agony, more torment than I've ever experienced ever. And then, 1,000 years later, I get pulled up from hell, reunited with my body, just so I can then be officially sent down. That was pre-hell. That was remedial hell that you went to. And now that you have your body, you're in super hell. You're in real hell. So you can see why this doctrine of bodily resurrection starts to become a little bit difficult, especially for American Protestants. It doesn't quite make sense. And in fact, if you ask a theologian, they will say, why does it happen? Well, it happens because God decreed that it would happen. Okay, but that's kind of like me saying to my son, because I said so. Yeah, you still better do it, but that doesn't actually explain why. Why do I need a body? Why would I need a body if I'm already in heaven or if I'm already in hell? Unless you're claiming that the heaven I was in wasn't really heaven, or the hell that I was in wasn't really hell. Now, in Joseph's day, he noticed some conversation about heaven and hell, and one of the things that he published was a pretty straightforward declaration. What are our fundamental principles of your religion? So this is to the world he's publishing this. Answer: the fundamental principles of our religion is the testimony of the apostles and prophets concerning Jesus Christ, that he died, was buried, and rose again the third day, and ascended up to heaven. And all other things are only appendages to these which pertain to our religion. The most essential part of what we believe is that Jesus died and was resurrected and ascended to heaven. In fact, in an earlier publication, Joseph's going to put it this way in a letter that he wrote to the church. If the resurrection from the dead is not an important point or item of our faith, we must confess that we know nothing about it. For if there is no resurrection from the dead, then Christ has not risen. I lost my mic there for a minute. Maybe that's probably they actually control it. So if I start to teach false doctrine, then it's just like, and so part of it'll just be the remainder of the time you later, and that'll be the rest of our conversation. We must confess we know nothing about it, for if there is no resurrection from the dead, then Christ has not risen, and if Christ has not risen, he was not the Son of God. Christ himself assuredly is risen from the dead, and if he is risen from the dead, he will, by his power, bring all men to stand before him. For if he has risen from the dead, the bands of temporal death are broken, that the grave has no victory. If then the grave has no victory, those who keep the sayings of Jesus and obey his teachings have not only a promise of a resurrection from the dead, but an assurance of being admitted into his glorious kingdom. There's a reason why the resurrection matters. It is the demonstration that Jesus is the Son of God. And if Jesus is the Son of God, then all of us will be resurrected. Then the atonement is real. The empty tomb matters and should still matter for Christians. The idea of death and resurrection was something that was very much on Joseph's mind for much of his life because he experienced some pretty terrible tragedies in his life. The first being that shortly after he had his experience with Moroni, his oldest brother Alvin got sick. And in the 19th century, if you call a doctor, there is a much better chance they don't have a wellness program. There's a much better chance that they're going to hurt you rather than help you in almost all cases. I mean, there's some things they can do, like they're not bad at sawing off an arm. If you're shot in the arm, they're okay with that. You know, they can cauterize a wound. But they simply have no understanding of what causes disease. They don't know that germs exist, and they don't know that viruses exist. They actually believe there's two schools of thought in Joseph Smith's time. The first is that all disease is caused by what they called hypertension. So that, oh, okay, yeah, hypertension actually is a problem. That's not what you're thinking. They called it hypertension. What it meant was you have too much blood in your body. And because you have too much blood, it's making you sick. So what do we do if you have too much blood? We bleed you. In fact, this is what happens with George Washington. He is sick, and they bleed him, and they bleed him, and they bleed him, and he runs out of blood and he dies. That's how George Washington dies. The other thing that people from that first school of medicine did was they tried to treat people with calomel, which is powdered mercury. Now, it doesn't have the effect of health that you might think it would to eat mercury. And that's actually what Alvin is given. He's given calomel, and it's probably what kills him. It's at least what Joseph thinks kills him. The other school of medical thought, which is not from the actual universities, it's more of an herbalist tradition, a folklore tradition, is that all disease is caused by your body getting too hot or too cold. This is the reason why even still today your grandmother will say something to you like, oh, put your coat on or you're going to catch a cold. I'm pretty sure, Grandma, that the virus doesn't know whether I'm wearing a coat, does it? I mean, it's like, oh, he's got a jacket on. We'll get the next guy. But it's tradition because this belief was so common that being cold is what made you sick, right? And so anyway, so in a world where you don't even know why death is happening around you, or at least all of your explanations are terrible, it becomes even more difficult to deal with death. Now, sometimes people say, well, because death is so common in their world, I'm sure they were fine with it. Well, anyone who says that just hasn't read anything that anyone ever wrote. We like to flatter ourselves to believe that, we have it so much harder than anyone who came before us. And we only believe that because we have no idea what came before us. And we'd only need to spend a little bit of time in people's journals and in their letters to say, wow, I'm angry that I had to come to this presentation and that they had the wrong kind of chips, let alone something else. So Alvin's going to pass away, and the way Lucy Mack talks about it is it is horrible. Alvin's the oldest son. Not only do they love him so much, the house is filled with tears. He's saying goodbye to everyone as he's dying. Then their family loses the ability to make as much money as they need because Alvin's one of the people who's working. And they're in the middle of an economic depression. Joseph will be stung by that Alvin's death, the person he looked up to from such a young age, is going to weigh on him his whole life. But soon he actually wouldn't have to only reflect on the death of his sibling, because after he and Emma are married, when Joseph has the plates and Joseph's translating the Book of Mormon, in the midst of doing what God wants him to do, in fact, at the exact same time that Martin Harris takes the 116 pages up to Palmyra to show people the truth of the book, Emma gives birth to their first child. And by two different accounts, either the child was born stillborn or did live for a few moments and then died. And so Joseph and Emma lost their first son. Then, when they moved to Ohio, Emma's next pregnancy, she gave birth to twins. And both of those twins died immediately after birth. Then they adopted the Murdoch twins. And one of them dies only a year and a half later. So if you are Joseph and Emma, by 1832, you have had 5 babies in your house and only one left. in the space of 3.5 years. I mean, that's a lot. And I think that's part of the reason why the resurrection weighs on Joseph's mind so much, that while they're translating the Bible, Joseph's inquiries about the resurrection is what leads to what both Brigham Young and Wilford Woodruff declare is the greatest revelation that has ever been received. Period. Doctrine and Covenants, section 76. In fact, in Joseph's time, it matters so much they actually call it the vision. If you're ever reading a journal of your 19th century ancestor and they say, oh, we learned about Joseph's vision, they're never talking about the first vision. They're talking about this vision, where Joseph, it entails all the things the first vision has, right? It's got God and Jesus in there, but then it has everything else, an understanding of the afterlife. And part of this, we all know this great testimony that Joseph and Sidney give, but Joseph is going to be taught something about God and about the afterlife that transforms our understanding, transforms it in a way that even today, if you were to have a conversation with a Christian theologian, they would let you know one of the reasons why you're not a real Christian is because of this belief. In Joseph's time, nearly everyone in America was a Protestant, and nearly all of those Protestants followed a belief system called Calvinism. In Calvinist thought, if you were to draw it in circles, they don't ever draw in circles. That's us. We do circles. But just make it easy to understand. God created everything out of nothing. In the beginning, there wasn't anything. There wasn't time and space. There wasn't even matter. There was nothing. There was just God. And when, theologians got asked questions like St. Augustine did, what was God doing before he created everything? St. Augustine said he was creating hell for people who ask questions like that. It's a good way to end a conversation pretty quick, right? Now, okay, and we're done. So if God created everything out of nothing, created all of us out of nothing at the moment that we are conceived, and then God created this world. But God, because he knows everything, already knew who would have faith in Jesus and who wouldn't. So the fundamental principle of Protestant theology is you have to have faith in Jesus in this life. And if you don't, it actually doesn't matter why you don't. If you don't have faith in Jesus because you're born in Mongolia 1,000 years ago, welcome to hell. If you don't have faith in Jesus because your parents were atheists and they never allowed a Bible in your house and you died when you were 17, welcome to hell. You can actually determine whether or not anyone is in heaven or in hell immediately by asking this question. Did they have faith in Jesus when they died? And if the answer is no, it actually doesn't matter why the answer is no. If you don't have faith in Jesus, you go to hell. Now, this led to Christian theologians, Protestant theologians, trying to figure this out because almost no one has faith in Jesus. So what's more likely? That God created a plan, an all-powerful God created a plan whereby almost no one's saved. In fact, I should make heaven way smaller than that. Almost no one has faith in Jesus before they die, which means in God's plan, almost everyone goes to hell. What's more likely? That an all-powerful God who can do whatever they want, it's kind of the best part about being all-powerful, that they created a plan desperate for everyone to be saved, and they're just really bad at it. I mean, I know I'm the one deciding whether or not people are saved, but I just can't figure out how to do it. I really want to save everyone. It's just we're batting well under 100 here. This is a problem. Or you come to the conclusion that John Calvin came to, and that is God does exactly what God intends to do. God saves exactly who God intends to save. And if you have to have faith in Jesus to be saved, then that means the people who don't have faith in Jesus, God never intended to save. And when you say, well, that doesn't seem very fair, the response would be, that's exactly what I would expect an unrepentant sinner to say. Of course, someone who is evil like you would say, I don't know why God is doing what God is doing. From a Calvinist perspective, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, meaning every one of us deserved to burn in hell. And so God, in his mercy, decides to save a few of us. And not because we're good, it has nothing to do with us being good. Not because we sat down and read the Bible and we prayed and we came to have a testimony. No. God saved you because God did. And it was nothing of yourself. So the way that Calvinists would look at conversion is if you feel an impulse to study the Bible and you feel an impulse to worship Jesus, it's because God already gave you the gift of faith. Because God predestined to save you before he ever created you. Now, I know that's stark. It's very difficult for Latter-day Saints. But if you believe that God is all-powerful, that God created everything, including all of us, out of nothing, then God already knows at the moment he creates you whether or not you're going to be saved. If you say God doesn't know, then God's no longer all-powerful. Okay, so God does know. Because they say God's all-powerful, God knows. And you have to then say, could an all-powerful God save you if he wanted to? If you say no, then God's not all-powerful. So yes, of course, an all-powerful God could save you if he wanted to. So what do you conclude based upon the fact that almost no one goes to heaven? God doesn't intend to save most people. Because if he did, the best part about being all-powerful is that you would do it. It's like the greatest part about being omnipotent is you can do whatever you want. And so that was the conclusion. And this was the most common Protestant Christian theology in Joseph's time. Hell is giant, hell is awful, and just about everyone's going there. It's the reason why the Presbyterian theologian or minister at Alvin's funeral, at least reportedly, told the Smiths that Alvin was going to hell. Why? Now, the way William Smith reports it is because Alvin wasn't baptized, but Presbyterians don't believe you have to be baptized to go to heaven. Its baptism is a sign that you are a believer. If you're an adult man living in a Christian country, you're in your 20s and you haven't yet felt the pull of faith to join yourself to a church, clearly God did not give you the gift of faith. And therefore, welcome to hell, population you. So in this worldview, Joseph has his great vision of the resurrection of the dead and the judgment. And the part of that vision that was so stark that it caused dozens of people to leave the church. In fact, some of the early leaders of the church apostatize over Doctrine and Covenants, section 76. Why? Because in it talks about the 3 degrees of glory, and it talks about the telestial glory. Well, who goes to this lowest kingdom of heaven? These are they who are liars and sorcerers and adulterers and whoremongers, and whosoever loves and makes a lie. These are they who suffer the wrath of God on earth. These are they who suffer the vengeance of eternal fire. These are they who are cast down to hell and suffer the wrath of Almighty God. Well, up to this point, this sounds pretty good to your average Christian. Yes, of course, they're going to burn. The problem is, it says until. So they're going to suffer until? No, the whole point of hell is that it's forever. Suffering is forever. That's the entire point of it in Christian theology. And Joseph receives in this vision that while there is suffering for unrepentant of sins, even the most wicked will suffer until the fullness of times when Christ shall have subdued all enemies under his feet and shall have perfected his work. In other words, this idea of eternal suffering in an eternal place called hell was a false doctrine. And a bunch of people said, that's it, I'm off the Joseph Smith train. Because for 1,800 years, hell has been forever. Hell is always. It's the most prominent feature, again, of our circles. And Joseph Smith arrived and said, well, actually, this part doesn't exist of this. And so people said, that's it, I'm out. Now, of course, now you could try to conjure up, yeah, but the celestial kingdom's like so bad that it's probably kind of like hell, only if you've never read a description of hell. Because in Doctrine and Covenants section 76, what does Joseph Smith say? We saw in heavenly vision the glory of the celestial, which surpasses all understanding. And no man knows it except him, to him whom God has revealed. The celestial kingdom is so great and so glorious that you can't comprehend it unless God opens the heavens to you and shows it to you. Words don't describe how great and glorious it is. In fact, Joseph will rewrite Doctrine and Covenants section 76 into poetic verse in 1843, and there he will say, and thus I beheld in the vision of heaven the celestial glory, dominion, and bliss, surpassing the great understanding of men unknown, save revealed in a world vain as this. Boy, bliss is a pretty powerful word. It's frankly the way that Christians describe heaven. So apparently, after the suffering that takes place for these people's sin, it's a kingdom of bliss. This is something that's not terribly long ago, President Oakes reiterated, talking about this, that there's not just two places that people go. He goes on to say, a loving Heavenly Father has a better plan for his children. The revealed doctrine of the restored church of Jesus Christ teaches that all the children of God, with exceptions too limited to consider here, will finally end up in a kingdom of glory. That is radical theology. That is entirely different than the traditional Christian world. And I think this is the beginning of Joseph Smith's understanding and fascination with the resurrection. It's something he's going to preach on again and again. He'll give a lengthy conversation of this in 1843, where he talks about the people that he's lost. At this point, he's lost his father. 2 years earlier, he'd lost his younger brother, Don Carlos. And shortly after he lost his younger brother, Don Carlos, his own son, also named Don Carlos, passed away. And Joseph talks about this. I remember the scenes of my childhood. I've thought of my father who's dead, who died by disease, which was brought on him by the suffering by the hands of the ruthless mob. He feels like this because Father Smith got sick in the being driven out of Missouri, and he never recovered. And so Joseph attributes his death to the fact that they were exterminated out of Missouri. He was a great and a good man. The envy of knaves and fools was heaped upon him, and this was his lot and his portion all the days of his life. He was of noble stature and possessed a high and holy and exalted and virtuous mind. His soul soared above all those men and groveling principles that are so subsequent to the human heart. I now say that he never did a mean act that might be said was ungenerous in his life, to my knowledge. I love my father and his memory, and the memory of his noble deeds rests with ponderous weight upon my mind. And many of his kind and parental words to me are written on the tablet of my heart. Sacred to me are the thoughts which I cherish of the history of his life that have rolled through my mind and have been implanted there by my own observation since I was born. Sacred to me is his dust and the spot where he is laid. Sacred to me is the tomb I have made to encircle over his head. Let the memory of my father eternally live. Let his soul or spirit my follies forgive. With him may I reign one day in the mansions above and tune up the lyre of anthems and the eternal Jove. May the God that I love look down from above and save me from mine enemies here and take me by the hand that on Mount Zion I may stand. And with my Father crown me eternally there. Words and language is inadequate to express the gratitude that I owe to God for having given me so honorable a parentage. My mother, she was still alive, is also one of the noblest and best of all women. May God grant to prolong her days and mine, that we may live to enjoy each other's society long, yet in the enjoyment of liberty and to breathe the free air. Alvin, my oldest brother, I remember well the pangs of sorrow that swelled my youthful bosom and almost burst my tender heart when he died. He was the oldest and the noblest of my father's family. He was one of the noblest of sons of men. Shall his name not be recorded in this book? He's talking about the book of life. Yes, Alvin, let it be had there and be handed down upon these sacred pages forever and ever. For in him there was no guile. He lived without spot from the time he was a child. From the time of his birth, he never knew mirth. He was candid and sober and never would play, and minded his father and mother in toiling all day. He was one of the soberest of men. When he died, the angel of the Lord visited him in his last moments. These childish lines I record in remembrance of my childhood scenes. My brother Don Carlos Smith, whose name I desire to record also, was a noble boy. I never knew any fault in him. I never saw the first immoral act or the first irreligious or ignoble disposition in the child. From the time he was born till the time of his death, he was a lovely and good-natured and kind-hearted and virtuous and faithful and upright child. And where his soul goes, let mine go also. He lays by the side of my father. Let my father, Don Carlos and Alvin, and the children that I have buried be brought to be laid in the tomb that I've built. Let my mother and my brethren and my sisters be laid there also, and let it be called the tomb of Joseph. There are many souls whom I have loved stronger than death. To them I have proved faithful. To them I am determined to prove faithful until God calls me to resign up my breath. So you can feel some of the emotion Joseph has on the people that he's lost. At one point, Wilford Woodruff records in his journal a sermon that Joseph gives when the son of William Marks, Ephraim Marks, a young boy, passed away, and while Joseph was speaking, they brought the body to where he was speaking. President Joseph Smith spoke upon the occasion with much feeling and interest. Among his remarks, he said, "It is a very solemn and awful time. I've never felt more solemn. It calls to mind the death of my oldest brother who died in New York, and my youngest brother, Don Carlos Smith, who died in Nauvoo. It has been hard for me to live on earth and to see these young men whom we have leaned upon as a support and comfort taken from us in the midst of their youth. Yes, it's been hard to be reconciled to these things. I've sometimes felt that I should have felt more reconciled to have been called myself, if it could have been of the will of God. Yet I know that we ought to be still and know that it is of God and be reconciled. All is right. It will be but a short time before we shall all in like manner be called. It may be the case with me as well. As some of you suppose that Brother Joseph could not die." He sang this in April of 1842, so in 2 years he will be murdered. But this is a mistake. It's true that there have been times when I've had the promise of my life to accomplish such and such things, but having accomplished those things, I have not at present any lease on my life, and I am as liable to die as any other men. I can say in my heart that I have done nothing against Ephraim Marks that I'm sorry for. And I would ask any of his companions if they have done anything against him that they are sorry for, or that they would not like to meet at the bar of God. If so, let it prove as a warning to all men, to deal justly before God with all men, that we shall be clear in the day of judgment. When we lose a near and dear friend upon whom we've set our hearts, we can never feel the same afterwards, knowing that if we set our hearts upon others in like manner, they may be taken from us. In another discourse a year later, he said, "In speaking of the resurrection, I would say that God has shown unto me a vision of the resurrection of the dead." One of the great visions that we don't talk about is that Joseph Smith is shown the morning of the first resurrection. He is shown it. He sees it. And he talks about it on multiple occasions. I saw the graves open, and the saints as they arose and took each other by the hand, even before they got up or while getting up, and great joy and glory rested upon them. I would esteem it as one of the greatest blessings if I'm afflicted in this world to have my lot cast where I can find my brothers and friends all around me. To have the privilege of having our dead buried on the land where God has appointed to gather his saints together, where there will be none but saints, where they may have the privilege of laying their bodies, where the Son of Man will make his appearance, and where they may hear the sound of the trump that shall call them forth to behold him. That in the morn of the resurrection they may come forth in a body and come up out of their graves and strike hands immediately in eternal glory and felicity, rather than to be scattered thousands of miles apart. There is something good and sacred to me in this thing. The place where a man is buried is sacred to me. I will tell you what I want. If tomorrow I shall be called to lay in yonder tomb, in the morning of the resurrection, let me strike hands with my Father and cry, my Father. And he will say, my son, my son. And as soon as the rock rends before we come out of the graves, may we contemplate these things so? Yes, if we learn how to live and how to die. When we lie down, we contemplate how we will rise up in the morning. It is pleasing for friends to lie down together, locked in the arms of love, to sleep and awaken each other's embrace and renew their conversation. Would you think it a strange thing if I relate to you this, what I've seen in vision in relation to this interesting theme? Those who have died in Jesus Christ may expect to enter into all the fruition of joy when they come forth, which they have possessed or anticipated here. So Joseph's teaching that it's not just the joy restored that you had while you were here. It's the joy you would have had you not passed away is going to be restored to you. So plain was the vision that I actually saw men before they descended up from the tomb, as though they were getting up slowly. Before they descended, they took each other by the hand and they said, my father, my son, my mother, my daughter, my brother, my sister. And when the voice calls for the dead to rise, suppose I'm laid by the side of my father, what would be the first joy of my heart? To meet my father, my mother, my brother, my sister. And when they are by my side, I embrace them and they embrace me. It is my meditation all the day and more than my meat and drink to know how I shall make the saints of God comprehend the visions that roll like an overflowing surge before my mind. He goes on to say, I have the privilege of communicating to you some things which, if grasped closely, will be a help to you when earthquakes bellow, the clouds gather and lightnings flash and the storms are ready to burst upon you like peals of thunder. Lay hold upon these things. Let not your knees or joints tremble, nor your hearts faint. What can earthquakes, wars, and tornadoes do? Nothing. All your losses will be made up to you in the resurrection, provided you continue faithful. By the vision of the Almighty, I have seen it. More painful to me than the thoughts of annihilation, than death, if I had no expectation of seeing my father, mother, brothers, sisters, and friends again. My heart would burst in a moment, and I would go down to the grave. The expectation of seeing my friends in the morning of the resurrection cheers my soul, and it makes me bear up against the evils of life. It is like they are taking a journey, and on their return we shall meet them with increased joy. For Joseph Smith, the resurrection was the center of our eternal happiness. That all of those losses, and all of us have some, no one makes it through this life without experiencing the untimely death of someone. Their parent who goes too soon, a sibling, a trusted friend, a spouse. These are pains that were felt And that Joseph knew that by understanding what the purpose of this life was, it would help be a balm when we are suffering. Because Joseph reiterated over and over and over again, death is temporary. Our separation from the people that we love is temporary. It seems like it's forever when it happens, but it's not forever. Forever is being with the people that you love. Joseph will, at another time, be preaching on this. He says that God has revealed the Son from the heavens and a doctrine of the resurrection also. And we have a knowledge that those we bring here, God will bring them up again, clothed upon and quickened by the Spirit of the great God. And what mattereth it whether we lay them down or we lay down with them? When we can keep them no longer, then let them sink down like the ship in the storm. The mighty anchor holds her safe. So let these truths sink down in our hearts, that we may even here begin to enjoy that which shall be in full hereafter. Hosanna, Hosanna to Almighty God. That the rays of light begin to burst forth upon us even now. I cannot find words to express myself. I am not learned, but I have as good a feelings as any man. Oh, that I had the language of an archangel to express my feelings once to my friends. But I never expect to in this life. When others rejoice, I rejoice. When they mourn, I mourn. To Marcellus Bates, let me administer comfort. Marcellus Bates, his 21-year-old wife, a very young couple, had just passed away. You shall soon have the company of your companion in the world of glory. The friends of Brother Barnes, this is Lorenzo Dow Barnes, who died on a mission in England. They received word that he had died. To the friends of Brother Barnes and all the saints who are mourning, this has been a warning voice to us all to be sober and diligent, to lay aside mirth and vanity and folly, and be prepared to die tomorrow. Joseph would bring this up again and again, that when death occurs, it should remind us of why we're even here, what the purpose of this life is, and that God is going to make everything right in the end. When talking about little children that pass away, he said, I've meditated upon this subject and asked the question, why is it the infant, innocent children are taken away from us? This is a very, very personal question for Joseph. Especially those that seem to be the most intelligent beings. This world is a very wicked world. It's a proverb that the world grows weaker and wiser. But if this is the case, the world grows more wicked and corrupt. He goes on to say that the Lord takes many away, even in infancy, that they may escape the envy of man and the sorrows and evils of this present world. They were too pure, too lovely to live on earth. Therefore, if rightly considered, instead of mourning, we have reason to rejoice, as they are delivered from evil, and we shall soon have them again. The doctrine of baptizing children or sprinkling them, or they must welter in hell, is a doctrine that is not true. It is not supported in Holy Writ and is not consistent with the character of God. The moment the children leave this world, they are taken to the bosom of Abraham. The only difference between the old and the young dying is that one lives longer in heaven and eternal light and glory than the other, and was freed a little sooner from this miserable, wicked world. Notwithstanding all this glory, we for a moment lose sight of it and mourn the loss. But we do not mourn as those without hope. One of the most important reasons why Joseph talks about the resurrection over and over and over again is it should give us hope. When we lose someone, that pain is the kind of pain that doesn't go away very easily. Because while it might soften over time, that hole is still there. And I know in my own life, when I lost my dad, it was when he was still fairly young. And it was very difficult. A few years ago, without warning, my youngest brother died. And I didn't get to say goodbye to him. And it can sometimes feel like you've been robbed. Honestly, that's how I feel. Every holiday that goes by that I don't get to sit and talk to my brother, every day that I see his two little kids that were 2 and 3 when he died, I think the world has been robbed. Those boys have been robbed. I have been robbed. I don't know how it is that God will make that up to me. I don't. Where will my 50 years of spending time with my brother, how will I get that back? But I know that through the promise of the atonement of Jesus Christ, it will. It will be made up to me. I know that death is a very difficult and personal thing, and many of you in here have suffered far more than I ever could imagine. The promise of the empty tomb of Jesus Christ is that you will have your loved ones again. The resurrection is not an appendage to what we believe. It is the whole purpose of our belief. I bear you my testimony that I know that Joseph Smith saw Jesus, and he saw him on multiple occasions, and he didn't just see him by himself, he saw him with other people over and over and over again. The reason why I know that Jesus Christ lives is because I know that Joseph Smith saw him. And as he said, if Jesus is resurrected, then that means all of us will be resurrected. I bear you my testimony that the pain that we are suffering, however hard and horrible it seems, will eventually give way. Weeping may endure for the night, but joy cometh in the morning. And in this case, the morning of the first resurrection. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.